Hello everyone! In this Hearthstone Journey to Un'Goro deck tech, I want to take a look at the deck that was presumed dead but simply isn't. The Dragon Priest. Turns out the power of Drakonid Operative, together with the only dragon to come out from Un'Goro, the Primordial Drake, is enough to save Dragon Priest after all. It's a little bit different. It's not so good against aggro anymore, but it has even more of that mid-range power than it used, so it still remains a viable deck even though it plays out a little bit differently than what it used to. The one card we have to thank for saving Dragon Priest is the Primordial Drake. At first it looked like it was going to be a little bit too slow. People were skeptical, okay, is this going to really find a place in decks? But it turns out that big body, taunt, and also having that immediate effect on the board, wiping out smaller minions altogether, is actually a pretty good package. As for the deck list, well, here is the list that I have recently been playing on Legend Ladder. It's a mid-range type of list that is able to clear up a lot of boards, apply some pressure, and is ultimately able to outvalue the opponent. Pretty good taking on other mid-range decks, taking on control decks. A little bit weaker against aggro. As for the card choices in this deck, the deck is running 8 copies of dragons. And that seems to be pretty much the standard dragon package right now. So it uses all of the good mid-range dragons that are left in the game. So there are 2 copies of Twilight Drake, there are 2 copies of Drakonid Operative, which is of course a true powerhouse, and there are 2 copies of Bookworm, and there are 2 copies of the Primordial Drake. And this really shows how important Primordial Drake is for Dragon Priest. Because if there was no Primordial Drake, okay, what would I have run then? 6 dragons is not enough. We know from previous experience that if you want to run these synergy effects somewhat reliably, you're looking at adding something like 8 or 9 dragons into the deck. Well, we have the Drakonid Operative, which relies on these synergy effects, and in this particular deck there's also the Netherspite Historian, which relies on these synergy effects. So those synergy effects really need to be online. If Primordial Drake was not an option, then I would basically be forced to run either Fairy Dragons or 2 really big dragons, the most prominent of which are Zera and Deathwing, both offering pretty much good win conditions on their own. Zera in grindy matchups, generating tons of value, being very difficult to remove, and Deathwing as an additional board clear that can help you swing the game, at the cost of your hand though. It's hard to imagine a Dragon Priest deck running both of them. It's pretty hard also to see Fairy Dragons seeing a lot of play, so Primordial Drake plays a very important role. And that said, you might want to take your deck in certain situations, for example by adding Zera or by adding Deathwing instead of one of the Primordial Drakes. In this list I'm running only 1 copy of Shadowword Pain. I generally don't find the Shadowword Pain that great. It's always a one-on-one trade. You use your card, they use their card. Of course, sometimes that can be really important, but still, it's not a card that I enjoy a whole lot. And I'm also running 2 Bookworms anyway, so I can remove those low attack minions later in the game quite effectively. What I'm running 2 copies of instead is Shadowword Death, which is great when you're facing stuff like Arcane Giants. Then you can quite cost effectively remove them from the game. Dragon Priest also has some really impressive AoE. In this particular list there's the Dragonfire Potion in 2 copies, 5 damage to everything, lines up pretty well against Quest Rogue by the way. And then there's 1 copy of Holy Nova, which comes down a little bit earlier but is also a little bit less effective. And all of Priest's removal is amplified by the presence of Shadow Visions. Shadow Visions has turned out to be exactly as good as I predicted. You can get additional copies of stuff that you need. You can find the cards you need right when you need them. A very, very flexible and powerful card. For example, I have defeated Quest Rogues by playing 4 copies of Dragonfire Potion. That's some pretty impressive stuff right there, and just shows what kind of things Shadow Visions can do. So what exactly is the win condition of Dragon Priest? In this particular list, the win condition is good removal combined with a ton of value, especially from Netherspite Historian and from Drakonid Operative. So the deck is just able to generate so many resources that it can overwhelm the opponent. However, that is not the only win condition that is used in Dragon Priest decks. There are at least 3 alternatives that you could try if you like. One, perhaps the most prevalent right now, is Lyra the Sunshard. Combined with a number of cheap spells, perhaps the discount from the Radiant Elemental, Lyra can really generate a ton of resources and be a win condition all by itself. It can give you Divine Spirit and Inner Fire, it can give you mind controls, all sorts of stuff that you can use to win the game. I think Lyra is a little bit less suited for Dragon Priest than for pure Miracle Priest, because Dragon Priest tends to run a lot of minions and not that many spells, so you won't have as many activators for Lyra as you have in some other decks, but it is still a perfectly viable consideration. As one of the win conditions Lyra can give you is Divine Spirit and Inner Fire, making a huge minion and then giving that a lot of attack. Well, some people also opt to include these cards directly into the deck, and then with Shadow Visions you're able to dig them out when you need them, so that's also a pretty powerful thing to have. Especially in Dragon Priest, where you tend to have all these minions with pretty high health. Twilight Drake can be a 4/10 when you play it at best. Divine Spirit, Inner Fire, that you have a 20/20. So there are some pretty powerful things you can do if you include these combo pieces into your deck. The downside is that sometimes they're just dead cards in your hand and then you're unable to do much, the traditional problem of the combo priest. But with the number of minions Dragon Priest is still running, and with Shadow Visions to dig for these combo cards when you need them, they are actually a pretty good match for Dragon Priest. Finally, you could also go for even more value and add Elise the Trailblazer into the deck. Elise gives you this Ungoro pack, 5 more cards, and with Shadow Visions you can dig for more Ungoro packs. I've actually had people play 3 Ungoro packs against me before, so that's 15 additional cards, that's a lot of resources. It's definitely another interesting take. Some people opt to run Elise but not run their Netherspite Historians, for example. So there are lots of variations on the team that you can do. Dragon Priest lost all of its early game in the rotation. So right now the early game of Dragon Priest is pretty much the same as other priest decks. You have Nocha Cleric, you have Radiant Elemental, you have Powered Shield, Shadow Word Pain, then Cabal Talon Priest. These kinds of things. Radiant Elemental in particular can be pretty powerful because it reduces the cost of your spells by 1. So on turn 2 you can play Radiant Elemental and add a 0 mana Powered Shield into it and make a 2/5. So that, for example, is one route that you can use in many of the games to gain that early board presence that you can then use to not fall behind so that your mid-range dragons can start generating that advantage for you. So if you are facing a meta that's different than what I have been playing this on, you need to take it appropriately. What to switch? Well, the 2 most obvious tech slots in this deck. The first one is the Cabal Songstealer. Cabal Songstealer 5 mana 5/5 with Silence is something that I have enjoyed a lot. When you're facing these paladins nowadays, then they play stuff like Spike-Ridge Steed on a minion. Ability to silence that away is pretty good. Ability to silence Big Edwin Van Cleaves is good. Ability to silence Sherazin. There are just a lot of nice things you can do when you have a silence effect in your deck, so I think it's pretty good in the current meta, but it is a tech slot. So if the meta doesn't really warrant running silence effect, then the Cabal Songstealer can definitely go. Another tech slot is the Cabal Shadow Priest, an old priest staple, stealing away those small minions from your opponent. I'm not running pint-sized potion in the list, and well, I would need to have more synergies to actually warrant running that, so Cabal Shadow Priest can really only steal the small ones. It's great, for example, against Taunt Warrior. You can steal a Bloodhoof Brave, or preferably you can steal an Ally Armorsmith, and that's quite huge value. And it can also do some nice things in many of the other matchups, but it is a little bit on the slow side. So if you're facing a very aggressive meta, you could consider, for example, replacing this with a Potion of Madness. Try to contest that early game a little bit better. I already mentioned the possibility to include a big dragon, so that's something you could do. You could drop the Netherspite Historians, or you could drop one of the Primordial Drakes, make room for a big dragon. That's one way that you can change this deck. And the final tech slots, I think, are the Priest of the Feast. Priest of the Feast is a really key card in the Freeze Mage matchup in particular, and it can also be pretty helpful against aggro, so it has quite wide uses, but in the end it is still a tech card. If you find that you don't need that healing, then you really don't need a Priest, so then you can use that slot for something else. Freeze Mage matchup is a really interesting one, because Priest used to be one of the main victims of Freeze Mage. The Freeze Mage of old just rolled all over Priest, and Priest didn't have a chance. But right now, Priest is actually the best counter to Freeze Mage. Maybe a more spell-focused Lyra type of Priest could even be better, but Dragon Priest definitely has its chances. With Priest of the Feast offering burst healing, and then you have Drakonid Operative to steal ice blocks. So that's a pretty powerful combination. And Freeze Mage can no longer OTK you. They don't have the discounts anymore to go for that Kobold OTK, deal 30 damage in one turn. Right now, Freeze Mage is highly reliant on Alexstrasza, putting you down to 15, and then they may get some spells from Primordial Glyphs. So once they get you lower, their reach is generally in the range of 18-20 damage, something like that. And once they're Alexstrasza, you slam down Priest of the Feast, Powered Shield, Shadow Word Death, boom, you're at 21. Nice. And from there on out, you just keep healing yourself with the Priest, and the Freeze Mage is unable to catch up. So the matchup has definitely changed. Okay, sometimes the Freeze Mage can still obviously win. You don't find a Priest of the Feast. You don't find enough spells to go with the Priest of the Feast. Freeze Mage has really good glyphs, so they have a lot of damage. You are unable to pressure them. There are still some kind of conditions where Freeze Mage wins, but this matchup is now heavily favored for the Priest. I have also had quite good success playing against Quest Rogue with Dragon Priest, and that's actually a little bit surprising because according to Vicious Syndicate statistics, Quest Rogue should be heavily favored against Dragon Priest. So this might be just my small sample size. But still, the ability to clear the boards with Dragonfire potions and to have these Primordial Drakes as big taunts on the way, the combination of these cards and Shadow Visions to create more Dragonfire potions is really what wins you games against Quest Rogue. Repeatedly clearing boards, using Primordial Drakes to prevent them from chain running chargers into you. That's one way the Quest Rogue wins. They have a charger and they have a bunch of bounce effect. If you don't have a taunt, then the charger is just going to connect phase once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, all the time. So that's something that you need to be aware of, but Primordial Drake helps with that a lot. I have also enjoyed playing Priest against Miracle Rogue. Funnily enough, because Miracle Rogue is another deck that has traditionally wiped the floor with the Priest. But the most common builds of Miracle Rogue nowadays are focused around Arcane Giants, and interestingly enough, the Dragon Priest deck has enough removal to remove every single threat in the Miracle Rogue deck. And that's pretty sweet. The thing is that Miracle Rogue is still able to cycle through their deck faster than you are, so there is always the chance that they just overwhelm you, and even though you have all the removal available, you're just unable to find it fast enough or use it fast enough when they slam down a couple of Arcane Giants on the same turn and this kind of stuff. But it's a very interesting matchup that I have had a lot of fun playing. One of the downsides of this list that I have been using is the Pirate Warrior matchup. Because Dragon Priest lost all of its early game, it's a lot more of a struggle to fight against these all-out aggressive decks. And Pirate Warrior is one of the fastest ones, so it's something that can really give you trouble. If there's a lot of Pirate Warrior around, then you probably need something like Potion of Madness and some kind of tech choices in the early game to help you improve that matchup. In general, Dragon Priest is weaker against aggro than it used to be, but it's still a very powerful deck against other midrange and control decks. So when you're facing Taunt Warriors, when you're facing midrange Paladins, there's still a lot of things that the deck can do. It's really interesting to still see Dragon Priest alive, and I have had a ton of fun playing this deck, so I highly recommend it. When you really think about it, it's amazing that the deck is still alive. I mean, Dragon Priest lost the Twilight Whelp, the Vermist Agent, the Blackwing Technician, Brand Bronzebeard, Twilight Guardian, Blackwing Corruptor, and Azure Drake. It's the deck that lost the most in the rotation. No other deck lost as many cards as Dragon Priest, but thanks to the power of Drakonid Operative and the Primordial Drake, I cannot overemphasize the importance of Primordial Drake in giving that one crucial dragon more to replace everything that we lost. And Dragon Priest is still alive and kicking. And it's a really nice mid-range deck right now. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more.